The alien princess discovers that the soldier who won the war is her childhood friend. The battle was over. The once thunderous sounds of lasers and explosions had faded into echoes, leaving only silence and the faint hum of distant starships orbiting the alien planet. Humanity had won, and yet in the quiet that followed, victory felt heavy. Not with sadness exactly, but with a weight that pressed upon everyone who had survived. Kale stood at the edge of the landing platform, watching the human ships come and go. He had seen war from the front lines, led charges that turned the tide, and yet now he felt as if the entire galaxy had changed in ways he could not yet name. The planet beneath him was alien in its beauty. Towers of crystal-like metal glimmered under the pale sun, and rivers of liquid light flowed between them like veins of a living organism. This was the world of the alien empire humanity had fought so hard to conquer, and yet it was not empty. It still breathed. It still lived. It was strange and foreign, yet in some ways it reminded Kale of the forests he had played in as a child, though the trees here were taller, the colors brighter, and the air hummed with a low, constant vibration. People around him cheered quietly. Victory was celebrated with dignity rather than the loud revelries Kale remembered from Earth. The alien civilians, some in elaborate robes, others in simpler garments, stood at a distance, uncertain whether to look at the humans with fear or hope. Kale's eyes scanned the crowd, observing their expressions, their gestures, trying to find some measure of understanding. He had always believed that war would teach him something about strength, about courage, but standing here now, he realized that it had also taught him about connection, about memory, about the threads that tie people together across time and space. And then he saw her. A young woman moving gracefully among the alien dignitaries, her posture regal, her gaze steady yet soft. Her hair fell in waves like liquid night, and her eyes, Kale's heart skipped a beat, held a light he had known long ago. He blinked, thinking it must be a trick of his imagination, yet she looked unmistakably familiar. Something inside him stirred, a memory buried under layers of time and war. He remembered laughter under starlit skies, shared stories in secret gardens, and a promise to always protect one another. Could it really be her, Princess Lyra, the very name he had almost forgotten, the girl who had once been his friend? The friend who had been lost to him when war broke out, when humans and aliens had been forced to choose sides. He had never allowed himself to hope he would see her again. Yet here she was, standing amidst her people, alive and real and somehow untouched by the war's horrors. Or perhaps she carried them silently, in a way only those who had lost everything could. Kale took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. He reminded himself that appearances could be deceiving, that memory could play tricks. He had fought countless battles, seen countless faces, and yet his mind refused to let go of the possibility that this was the Lyra he had known. As if sensing his gaze, the princess turned slightly, her eyes scanning the crowd. For a moment their eyes met, and time seemed to halt. Kale could not look away. He saw recognition flicker in her expression, subtle and fleeting, before it was masked by composure and the careful grace of a ruler. The ceremony began. Speeches were delivered, thanking humans for ending the war, praising the bravery of soldiers, and promising a new era of peace. Kale's name was mentioned, though not directly. He was one of many who had contributed, yet the words seemed to echo differently in his ears. They were a reminder of what he had done, of the lives he had touched and the lives he had taken. And yet, standing here, he realized that the story was not only about victory. It was about survival, about connection, and perhaps most importantly, about choices made from the heart. Lyra moved closer to the platform where Kale stood. Her presence was commanding, yet there was a softness in her steps, as if she was cautiously approaching a memory she had not dared to revisit for years. When she finally stopped within a few paces of him, Kale felt a strange mix of fear and hope. He had spent years imagining this moment, wondering how it might feel to meet her again, to see if the bond they once shared could survive the distance of time and the chasm of war. And now it was happening. "Kale," she said, her voice steady but carrying the faintest tremor. He could hear it even above the crowd, hear it as clearly as he had heard it in his dreams. The name, spoken by her lips, carried weight, memory, and recognition all at once. Kale nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, acknowledging that yes, he was here, and yes, he remembered. Her eyes searched his face, trying to reconcile the soldier before her with the boy she had known. I did not expect to see you here, she admitted softly, though there was no shame in her words, only honesty. I thought the war would. Her voice faltered, and Kale understood. She had feared the worst, feared that he had been lost like so many others. I survived, Kale said simply, because I had to, and because I hoped I might see you again. The princess looked away briefly, and Kale could see the inner struggle. She was a leader now, responsible for her people, carrying the weight of her empire's survival on her shoulders. Yet beneath that, she was still the girl who had once trusted him completely, who had shared dreams and secrets with him under alien stars. Kale wanted to reach out, to close the distance between them, but he knew that some things could not be rushed. Trust, like memory, took time to restore. The crowd began to disperse, leaving Kale and Lyra standing slightly apart from the others. The hum of the city seemed to fade, replaced by the quiet pulse of their shared history. You have grown, Kale said, breaking the silence, and you become strong, stronger than I imagined. Lyra smiled faintly, a mixture of pride and wistfulness. And you, she replied, have changed as well. I can see it in your eyes. You carry more than just victory, Kale. You carry the weight of choices of lives saved and lost. Kale nodded, knowing she spoke the truth. War had taught him many things, but nothing had prepared him for the moment he might face the person he had once promised to protect. And yet, standing there, he realized that perhaps the lessons of war were meant to prepare him for this, the chance to reconnect, to build something new from the ruins of the past. For a long moment, neither spoke. Words felt inadequate, incapable of capturing the depth of what they shared. Instead, they let their presence speak, letting memory and recognition bridge the gap that time and conflict had created. And in that silence, Kale felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this was the beginning of something greater than victory, greater than war. A chance for understanding, for friendship renewed, and for a peace that might last longer than any battle. The sun dipped lower in the alien sky, casting long shadows across the crystalline towers. The light caught Kale's armor, reflecting in shards of brilliance, and he realized that, like the planet before him, he too had been shaped by the forces around him, war, loss, survival. But he was still whole. He still had the capacity to feel, to connect, to hope. Lyra finally spoke again, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper meant only for him. Kale, I never stopped hoping I would see you again. Kale's heart ached with the weight of that simple confession. And I never stopped trying to survive so I could, he replied. Around them, the world moved on. Soldiers saluted, dignitaries exchanged words, and life began to resume its rhythm. But for Kale and Lyra, the moment stretched, suspended in time, marking the first step toward a future neither of them could yet fully imagine. A future where the past was not forgotten, but where hope and connection could guide them toward something brighter, something stronger than war. As the crowd slowly dispersed and the first stars appeared in the alien sky, Kale realized that the war had ended, but a new journey was beginning. One that would test their hearts, their minds, and their capacity to bridge worlds. One that would remind him that humanity's true power lay not in weapons or strategies, but in the ability to remember, to hope, and to connect, even in the darkest of times. And for the first time in years, Kale felt that perhaps victory was not just about surviving the war. Perhaps victory could also mean finding his way back to the person who had once been his friend, and discovering that even across the vastness of space and conflict, some bonds could endure. The day after the victory ceremony, the palace of the alien empire was quiet in a way that felt almost unnatural. The usual hum of activity was muted, as if the entire city itself was holding its breath. Princess Lyra moved through the corridors, her robes whispering against the polished floors, lost in thought. The memory of Kale's eyes, the brief recognition at the ceremony, lingered like a flame she could not extinguish. She tried to push it aside, reminding herself that she had duties to fulfill. Yet every time she closed her eyes, she saw him standing there, a soldier shaped by war, and yet somehow still the boy she had once known. Lyra's chambers overlooked a garden unlike any other on her planet. The plants glowed faintly in shades of silver and violet, and small streams of crystal-clear water ran between sculpted stones. It was a place of reflection, of solace, and she often came here to think. Today, however, the garden felt different. It held the memory of Kale as clearly as the air held the scent of flowers. She recalled the days when they had played together in secret corners of the palace, when the world seemed endless and simple, and she felt a pang of longing. How could the universe allow a friendship like theirs to survive the chaos of war? And yet it had. Meanwhile, Kale was not far away. He had requested temporary quarters within the city, not within the human encampment, but close enough to the palace that he could observe the world he had fought to conquer. He walked along the streets that had once been battlegrounds, now filled with cautious citizens beginning to rebuild. His steps were steady, but his mind raced. The thought that Lyra might recognize him, that they might speak again, was both terrifying and exhilarating. He had spent years imagining this reunion, yet nothing in his preparation had captured the reality of her presence. The two met again by chance in the palace's lower halls. Lyra was walking toward the council chambers, her mind filled with reports and strategy, when she turned a corner and nearly collided with Kale. Both stopped abruptly, startled. "I didn't expect to see you here again," Lyra said, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of emotion. Kale smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and cautious amusement. "Nor did I," he replied, "though I had hoped this day would come sooner or later." For a moment, they stood silently, studying one another. Lyra saw not only the soldier who had won the war, but also the boy she had once laughed with under alien skies. Kale saw not only the princess who had grown into a leader, but also the friend he had promised to protect. The passage of years had changed them, shaped them, and yet something fundamental remained the same. "Do you remember the river near the old palace gardens?" Lyra asked suddenly, a trace of a smile on her lips. Kale's eyes lit up with recognition. "Of course. The water that glowed under the moonlight. You tried to teach me how to skip stones, and I kept falling in." Lyra laughed softly, a sound that seemed to echo through the empty corridor. "I thought you would remember that," she said. "I almost never thought of it after everything." Kale's expression softened. "I remembered. Every time I thought of home, I thought of that river, I thought of you." Her eyes widened slightly, and she looked away, as if afraid to show the emotions stirring inside her. "Kale, she began, but paused. The words she wanted to say were tangled in years of war, loss, and responsibility. She could not simply speak them aloud without fear of the consequences. Yet the connection they shared was undeniable, stronger than any political barrier, stronger than the scars left by the war. They continued walking together, not speaking much, but their presence was enough. Words seemed unnecessary. Around them, the palace moved with life. Advisors consulted with leaders, citizens came to pay their respects, and messengers hurried to deliver reports from distant colonies. And yet, in the midst of this, Kale and Lyra moved like 2 points of light drawn together by some invisible force. As evening fell, Lyra led Kale to a small observatory on the palace roof. The city stretched out below them, shimmering with the soft light of alien technology and the warm glow of fires rekindled after the war. Stars began to appear in the sky, countless points of light that made Kale think of Earth and the countless battles fought across space. "Do you ever wonder why we survived?" Lyra asked, leaning against the railing, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Kale considered the question. "I think about it often," he admitted. "Not just the survival of the human race, but why some of us personally survived. Why we still have the chance to stand here and speak. I don't know if it's luck or fate or something else." Lyra nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes I think it's because of choices, not the choices the generals or the kings made, but the small ones. The choices we made for each other, the times we risked something for a friend. Maybe that's why we're here now." Kale turned to her, a faint smile on his lips. "Then maybe it was you too. You always had courage, even when you didn't know it. Even as a child, you were strong in ways I couldn't always understand." Lyra's cheeks warmed at the compliment, though she quickly masked it with composure. "We all grew stronger in the war, Kale. Some of us by choice, some of us by necessity." The conversation drifted into silence, comfortable and quiet. Neither of them needed to speak. The presence of the other was enough. Yet beneath the calm, both felt a growing tension, an unspoken question about what the future held. Could they reconcile the past and the present? Could a human soldier and an alien princess find common ground after the devastation of war? The days that followed were filled with careful interactions. Kale attended council meetings, offering his knowledge of human strategy and diplomacy, though always in a way that respected Lyra's leadership. Lyra, in turn, shared insights into her people, teaching Kale about their culture, their fears, and their hopes. Slowly, they began to rebuild a friendship that had been fractured by time and conflict. discovering that laughter and shared memories could heal wounds that no weapon could. One afternoon, Kale found himself in the palace gardens again, walking among plants that shimmered with the colors of alien light. Lyra joined him, carrying a small satchel filled with seeds and tools. "I thought you might like to see how we grow things now," she said. "Life continues even after destruction, even after war." Kale watched her as she planted the seeds carefully, her hands gentle and precise. "It's beautiful," he said. "You've always had a way of making things grow, even people." Lyra smiled, a warmth in her eyes that reached beyond the words. "And you," she replied softly, "have a way of protecting them even when it's hard, even when it feels impossible." For a moment, the world seemed to shrink around them, leaving only the two of them and the quiet growth of new life. Kale realized that this was the essence of what he had fought for. Not power, not glory, but the chance to preserve something fragile and precious. And perhaps in Lyra's presence, he could finally understand the meaning of survival. That evening, as the twin moons rose over the city, Kale and Lyra stood together on the balcony of her chambers. The light from the moons reflected off their faces, soft and silver, casting long shadows. "Kale," Lyra said finally, her voice low, "I want to know you again, not just the soldier, not just the hero of the war. I want to know the boy I grew up with, the friend I almost lost." Kale took her hand gently, careful not to startle her. "I want that too," he said. "More than anything, I never stopped hoping that one day we could find each other again, and now we have the chance." They stood in silence, letting the quiet of the night speak for them. Around them, the city was slowly waking to a new dawn, a world in which humans and aliens might live side by side in peace. And for Kale and Lyra, the future held possibilities that stretched farther than any battlefield, possibilities built on trust, memory, and the bond of friendship that had endured across years and stars. In the weeks that followed, Kale and Lyra's connection deepened. They explored the alien city together, visiting places that had once been off-limits to outsiders, learning about each other's cultures, and sharing stories of childhood adventures and lost dreams. Each moment was a reminder that despite the war, despite the losses, humanity had the capacity to inspire, to heal, and to create bonds that no conflict could break. Kale began to see the ways in which humans had succeeded in the war not through sheer force, but through ingenuity, compassion, and determination. Lyra observed the same qualities in him, realizing that the boy she had once known had grown into a man whose heart and mind were as strong as his courage in battle. Together, they began to understand that the war had changed them, but it had not destroyed the qualities that made them human, or, in Lyra's case, had not destroyed the qualities that made her a bridge between two worlds. And as the first signs of spring appeared in the alien gardens, Kale and Lyra knew that this was only the beginning. The war was over, yes, but the challenge of building a future was just beginning. And for the first time in a long time, both of them felt a spark of hope that it was possible, not only for them but for the galaxy itself. Days passed quietly, yet beneath the calm, tension swirled like an undercurrent. Kale and Lyra continued to meet in secret, walking through gardens and observing the city from high terraces. Their shared memories created a delicate bond, like threads woven between past and present, but Kale could feel that a larger truth waited to surface, one that might test the fragile trust forming between them. The moment came unexpectedly. Lyra had invited Kale to a council meeting, insisting that he offer his perspective on rebuilding the city and reconciling with the human forces stationed nearby. The hall was massive, with crystalline pillars reflecting light in gentle rainbows. Council members sat in careful arrangement, discussing trade agreements, security measures, and the slow reopening of borders. Lyra's voice was steady as she called for Kale to speak, but she watched him closely, her gaze carrying questions unspoken. Kale cleared his throat, feeling the weight of the room on his shoulders. "The war is over," he began, "but its effects will last for generations. Humans fought to defend their homes and to protect life wherever possible. The victory was not only in force but in compassion. In every battle, we tried to minimize unnecessary loss. That is why we won, not just because of technology or numbers." Some council members nodded politely, though a few exchanged skeptical glances. Kale knew that trust between humans and the alien citizens was fragile. Years of war had left wounds too deep for speeches alone to heal. Yet he pressed on, emphasizing strategies for peaceful coexistence, sharing plans for rebuilding cities without military oversight and highlighting ways to involve citizens in governance. His words were practical, but they carried an unspoken message. Humanity had not only survived, but had learned how to protect, to solve problems, and to think creatively in impossible circumstances. When Kale finished, a silence hung in the air. Lyra approached him quietly once the council had dispersed. "Kale," she said softly, "there is something I need to ask you, something I have feared since the day we met again." Kale met her gaze. "What is it?" Lyra hesitated. "During the war, the final battle, did you—" Her voice trailed off, but Kale understood. She was asking if he had been responsible for the greatest destruction on her planet. She feared he might have been the one who had ended the lives of people she had once known, perhaps even friends or family. Kale's heart tightened. He had anticipated this question, but speaking the truth would change everything. "Lyra," he said carefully, "I fought in the war. I was a soldier. I did what I had to do. But I also did everything I could to protect lives wherever I could. Many lives were lost, yes, but not because I wanted them gone. I wanted to end the fighting to bring peace. And when I had the chance, I spared those I could, even if it meant taking greater personal risk." Lyra's eyes searched his, looking for deception, for the shadow of the enemy she had once fought against. Slowly, she saw something in him: the honesty, the weight of responsibility, and the lingering compassion that humans carried even in battle. She realized that Kale was not only the soldier who had helped win the war, but also the boy who had once promised to protect her. "You," she whispered, "you tried to save people even while fighting?" Kale nodded. "Every life I could, that is the difference, Lyra. Humans are strong not only in battle, but in heart. We think, we care. That is why we survived. That is why we won." Lyra was silent for a long moment, trying to reconcile the image of the fierce soldier with the boy she had known. Slowly, she reached out and touched his hand. "I believe you, Kale. I see it in your eyes. I see the boy I knew and the man who fought for life, not destruction." The tension between them eased slightly, but the moment of truth opened new questions. Kale realized that while Lyra trusted him personally, the wider political environment remained fragile. There were factions within her own empire who were skeptical of humans, who feared that victory would mean domination, not peace. Kale and Lyra would have to navigate these complexities carefully, showing that humanity's strength was not only in winning wars, but in creating solutions that benefited all. Over the following days, Kale accompanied Lyra to councils and gatherings. He observed the careful diplomacy required to rebuild trust and witnessed the subtle ways in which human strategies differed from what the alien empire had known. Humans prioritized flexibility, creativity, and collaboration. Kale shared examples of how humans had resolved conflicts without unnecessary loss, how innovation often replaced brute force, and how empathy could be a weapon as strong as any sword. Lyra watched him carefully, admiring the patience and insight he brought to each discussion. She began to understand the depth of humanity's victory, not just the battles fought, but the values that guided them. Kale's presence reminded her that humans were capable of extraordinary thought and extraordinary compassion, and that these qualities were what made them formidable allies, not just conquerors. One afternoon, while exploring a damaged city district, Kale and Lyra stumbled upon a small group of children hiding in the ruins of a collapsed building. Their eyes widened at Kale's presence, fearful at first, but Lyra approached them gently, speaking softly in their language. Kale knelt beside her, offering words of reassurance and small gifts of water and food. The children slowly relaxed, smiling as they realized that these two humans meant no harm. "It's strange," Lyra said, watching the children play briefly, "to see humans and aliens together without fear. After the war, I thought it would take decades for trust to grow." Kale smiled. "Trust grows when people see the choices we make. Not the choices we are forced to make, but the choices we make when we have the power to do otherwise. That is what makes humans human." Lyra looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of awe and gratitude. "You are teaching me more than strategy, Kale. You are teaching me what hope looks like." As the weeks turned into months, Kale and Lyra worked together to rebuild the city and restore its citizens' confidence. Kale's knowledge of human technology and problem-solving complemented Lyra's understanding of her people and their culture. Together, they implemented projects to clean water supplies, repair buildings, and establish schools where children from different backgrounds could learn and play together. Each small success reinforced the idea that humans had not only survived the war, but had thrived in ways that went beyond mere survival. Despite these efforts, tensions lingered. Certain council members whispered doubts about Kale's motives, while some citizens questioned whether humans could truly be trusted. Lyra confronted these challenges head-on, standing by Kale and demonstrating to her people that trust could be rebuilt through action, not just words. She found herself relying on him more than she had expected, not just as a soldier or advisor, but as a friend who understood the fragile balance between duty and compassion. One evening, Kale and Lyra returned to the palace gardens, walking along paths lined with glowing plants. The city shimmered in the distance, the light reflecting off tall towers and flowing rivers. "Kale," Lyra said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I have watched you these months. I see the care you take, the thought you put into every decision, the way you protect life even when it is difficult. You are not just a soldier. You are a reminder of why we fought and why we survived." Kale looked at her, feeling the depth of her words. "I never wanted to be a hero, Lyra. I only wanted to survive, to protect, to find a way back to the people I cared about. And now, I see that survival has meaning only if it allows us to build something better." Lyra smiled softly. "Then let us build it together." That night, as Kale stood on the balcony overlooking the city, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. From the front lines of a galaxy-wide war to the quiet moments in alien gardens, he realized that the true measure of strength was not the ability to destroy, but the ability to protect, to innovate, and to inspire trust. Humans had won the war, yes, but they had done so in a way that preserved life, nurtured hope, and created the foundation for a future where cooperation could flourish. Lyra joined him silently, and together they watched the stars. The twin moons reflected in their eyes, and Kale felt a sense of calm he had not known in years. "Kale," Lyra said finally, "I believe we can show them. We can show both humans and aliens that peace is possible, that life is worth more than victory alone." Kale nodded. "Yes. And we will start with our own friendship. If we can rebuild that, then perhaps we can help rebuild the galaxy." And in that quiet, shared moment, they both understood the truth of what they had fought for. War had tested them, challenged them, and changed them. But humanity's true strength, its ingenuity, its compassion, and its unwavering hope, had endured. And now, standing together under alien stars, Kale and Lyra felt that nothing could stop them from shaping a future worth fighting for. The days of rebuilding the alien city had brought a calm that was almost new, yet Kale and Lyra both sensed that the peace was fragile. Even as citizens smiled and worked together, a remnant faction of aliens, loyal to the old war council, remained hidden. They whispered of revenge, of regaining power, and of driving the humans away. Kale and Lyra knew that this quiet threat could erupt into chaos at any moment. The real test was not the war they had already won, but the war they might have to prevent through strategy, foresight, and the courage to act wisely. It was early morning when Kale and Lyra walked through the market district, observing the steady flow of people. Shops had reopened, vendors shouted their prices in melodic alien tones, and children ran between stalls, laughing and playing. Yet even in the midst of this bustling life, Kale noticed subtle signs, small groups lingering in shadows, murmurs that ended when someone approached. He turned to Lyra, his brow furrowed. "They are still here," he said quietly. "Those who cannot accept peace, they are waiting for the right moment to strike." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "I had hoped the war's end would be enough." "But some hearts are not changed by victory or by reason." Kale nodded. "Then we must give them no advantage. We need to anticipate their moves, think ahead, and act before they act." Together, they began devising a plan. Unlike the battles of war, this challenge required subtlety rather than force. Kale drew upon his experience with human strategies, decisions made not through brute strength, but through intelligence, observation, and creativity. He suggested setting up networks of watchers, discreetly monitoring suspicious activity without instilling fear. Lyra contributed her knowledge of the city, understanding where hidden paths and secret passages might be used for ambushes. Their approach was careful, precise, and nonviolent. They avoided confrontation, focusing instead on prevention and clever problem-solving. Kale set up small observation posts, using human devices that allowed them to communicate silently. Lyra enlisted loyal citizens who could blend into the city's rhythms, keeping an eye out for those who opposed peace. It was a test of patience and coordination, and both of them knew that a single misstep could ignite unrest. Over the following week, they moved through the city like quiet shadows, unseen but alert. They discovered that the remnant faction had hidden stockpiles of old weapons, remnants from the war, and had begun recruiting those dissatisfied with the new order. Lyra and Kale realized that a direct confrontation would cause panic, so they devised a plan to disarm the faction without violence. Using human ingenuity, Kale designed simple traps and diversions, devices that would block entry to strategic areas, alert them of movement, and isolate the faction in controlled spaces. Lyra coordinated with local citizens to ensure that no innocent bystanders would be affected. The day of execution arrived. Kale and Lyra moved through the city at dawn, coordinating signals with quiet precision. When the hidden faction attempted to mobilize, they were met with barriers that appeared suddenly, communication lines that redirected their efforts, and safe but inescapable containment areas. Panic did not spread. Instead, the would-be insurgents found themselves cut off, their plans thwarted without a single life lost. Kale watched as the leader of the faction, a tall alien with eyes full of anger and disbelief, realized the futility of their actions. "How did you?" he began, but the words died on his lips as Kale and Lyra appeared before him calmly, offering no threat, only a chance for surrender. Lyra spoke first, her voice calm but firm. "Your time of conflict is over. You do not need to fight anymore. There is a place for you in this city if you choose cooperation instead of vengeance, but if you resist, you will find no victory here, only isolation." Kale stepped forward. "We can resolve this without violence. Humans believe in finding solutions, not in fighting for the sake of pride. You still have a choice." The alien leader hesitated, then slowly nodded. The rest of the faction, seeing their leader's choice, followed suit. It was not humiliation or fear that forced their compliance, but understanding. They recognized the cleverness of Kale's planning, the fairness in Lyra's words, and the power of restraint. After the faction was secured, the city breathed again. Citizens emerged from their homes, unaware of the crisis that had been silently averted. Kale and Lyra walked through the streets, observing the daily life resuming without disruption. Children played, vendors shouted, and laughter rang through the air. The city was alive, safe, and unbroken. "Humans have a strange way of winning," Lyra said quietly as they walked side by side. "You don't always fight directly, yet you succeed. You think ahead, use your minds, and care about life. That is powerful," Kale smiled. "That is how we survived the war, not just with weapons, but with thought, care, and planning. Strength alone does not win a battle. Humanity knows that life is valuable, and we use every advantage to preserve it." Lyra looked at him, admiration shining in her eyes. "And now you have shown me that even our worst fears can be managed without bloodshed. You are teaching me how to protect my people in ways I never imagined." Together, they began implementing reforms throughout the city. Schools reopened with mixed classrooms for humans and aliens, emphasizing collaboration and shared understanding. Markets were reorganized to allow cooperation between human and alien merchants. Infrastructure that had been destroyed during the war was repaired using a combination of human technology and alien resources. Every project reflected a philosophy Kale and Lyra shared, that ingenuity, patience, and compassion could create solutions stronger than force alone. One afternoon, Kale led a small group of engineers to repair a collapsed bridge that had once divided two city districts. The structure was damaged severely, yet Kale's knowledge of human engineering allowed him to stabilize it efficiently. Lyra supervised the project, coordinating local workers and ensuring that all safety measures were observed. As the bridge was completed, people crossed it freely, marveling at how quickly and effectively it had been restored. Kale felt a quiet pride, not in personal accomplishment, but in the demonstration that humanity's methods could benefit everyone. Lyra joined him on the bridge as the sun set, casting gold and violet hues across the city. "You have shown me a new way to lead," she said softly. "A way that does not rely on fear or force, but on understanding and planning. Humans have much to teach us." Kale looked at the horizon, thinking of Earth, of battles fought and survived, of the friendships that had endured. "And you have shown me that leadership can be gentle as well as strong, that protecting life is the truest form of strength. Their bond deepened further, strengthened by the challenges they had faced together. Kale and Lyra began to trust one another completely, relying on shared judgment, intuition, and respect. The city flourished under their guidance, becoming a symbol of what could be achieved when different cultures collaborated, when human ingenuity was combined with alien knowledge, and when leadership was exercised with compassion. Yet Kale knew that vigilance was necessary. The galaxy beyond their city was vast, and remnants of conflict, of old fears and ambitions still existed. But for the first time, he felt a sense of hope that these challenges could be met, not with destruction, but with intelligence, courage, and the same qualities that had allowed humanity to survive against impossible odds. One evening, while observing the stars from a terrace overlooking the rebuilt city, Lyra spoke quietly. "Kale, do you think the galaxy can ever truly be peaceful?" Kale thought carefully. "Peace is not something that comes automatically. It must be earned, nurtured, and defended in ways that do not rely on fear. Humans have learned that. I believe that if we continue to lead with thought, courage, and care, it is possible, and I believe that we can show others how." Lyra smiled, her hand brushing against his. "Then let us continue together, not as a soldier and a princess, but as allies, friends, and leaders." Kale nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. The war had tested him, the city had challenged him, but standing beside Lyra, he knew that humanity's true strength, its ability to think, to plan, to protect, and to care, was greater than any weapon. It was a strength that could inspire, unite, and heal. As night fell and the city lights shimmered below, Kale and Lyra stood side by side, watching the stars. They had prevented violence, restored hope, and shown that human ingenuity could solve problems without destruction. The lesson was clear. Humanity's power was not in the battles they fought, but in the lives they protected, the challenges they overcame, and the trust they inspired. And in that moment, Kale realized that this was the true victory of the war, not the battles won, but the lives saved, the peace preserved, and the future they were building together. The journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, threats to face, and decisions to make. But Kale and Lyra now knew that, with intelligence, courage, and compassion, humanity could face anything, even the uncertainty of the galaxy. And together they would face it, side by side, guiding both humans and aliens toward a future built not on fear, but on hope, understanding, and the enduring power of the human spirit. The city shone in the early morning light, the towers of crystal reflecting the rising sun like scattered jewels. Birds, strange, luminous creatures, sang from the rooftops, filling the air with soft, melodic sounds. The citizens moved about with purpose and calm, rebuilding not just structures but trust, friendships, and hope. Kale walked beside Lyra along the main thoroughfare, observing the bustle. Markets were open, children ran freely, and humans and aliens worked together without suspicion. The air was heavy with promise, the promise of a new era, one not built on war but on cooperation. Lyra glanced at Kale, a smile touching her lips. "I never thought we would see this day so soon," she said softly. "A city alive again, safe and full of hope. It feels almost impossible." Kale chuckled quietly. "Nothing impossible if people work together. Humans know that. We survive by thinking, by solving problems, and by protecting life whenever we can. That is what allowed us to reach this moment." Lyra nodded thoughtfully. "And yet, it is not just human effort. It is everyone, humans and aliens alike. We are learning to trust one another. That is what matters most." Their steps took them to the central plaza, where preparations were underway for a ceremony to mark the full restoration of the city and the formation of a permanent alliance between humans and aliens. Flags fluttered gently, combining human colors with the shimmering tones of the alien empire. Citizens of both worlds gathered, curious and cautious, yet excited. Leaders, advisors, and children alike looked to Kale and Lyra as symbols of what cooperation could achieve. As the ceremony began, Lyra stood at the podium, her presence commanding yet warm. "Citizens of this city and representatives from our human allies," she began, her voice echoing across the plaza. "We have endured the darkness of war, witnessed loss, and felt the weight of fear. Yet today we stand together, not as enemies, but as allies, as friends, as a community united by hope, understanding, and courage. Today marks not just the rebuilding of our city, but the building of a new future." Kale stood beside her, feeling the weight of her words. He knew the journey had been difficult, that trust had been fragile, and that many challenges still lay ahead. But as he looked out at the crowd, at humans and aliens mingling freely, at children laughing, at citizens helping one another, he realized that the vision they had worked for was no longer a dream. It was reality. After the speeches, the ceremony moved to symbolic acts of cooperation. Humans and aliens worked together to plant a large central tree in the plaza, a hybrid species created through human technology and alien horticulture. Its leaves shimmered with multiple colors, reflecting the unity of both worlds. Lyra and Kale guided the first planting, their hands working in tandem, careful and deliberate. The citizens cheered, a sound filled with joy and relief. Kale felt a quiet pride, not for himself, but for what humanity had achieved. The victory of the war had been notable, yes, but the greater triumph was here. Life preserved, trust built, and hope restored. It was the human way, using intelligence, compassion, and courage to solve problems and create a future worth living for. As the ceremony continued, Lyra and Kale walked among the citizens, speaking quietly to families, exchanging words with children, and offering guidance to leaders. Each interaction was small, but collectively, they reinforced the message that peace and collaboration were possible. Kale showed alien engineers some of the simple human devices that could help with construction and water purification. Lyra introduced human teachers to alien children, demonstrating ways to share knowledge across cultures. Everywhere they went, humans and aliens learned from each other, inspired by the example set by Kale and Lyra. Later, when the sun was high in the sky, Kale and Lyra returned to the palace gardens. The air was fragrant with blooming flowers, and small streams of water reflected sunlight in dancing patterns. Lyra paused to watch a group of children, humans and aliens playing together near a fountain. "Look at them," she said softly. "They do not know of the war. They only know friendship, trust, and laughter. That is what we are building, a world for them." Kale watched the children, a smile touching his lips. It is what humans have always fought for, not just survival, but a future where others can live and grow. A world where hope is stronger than fear. And now, we are showing that it is possible here, too. Lyra turned to him, eyes thoughtful. "You have taught me much, Kale, about courage, about problem-solving, and about seeing beyond conflict to find solutions. But more than that, you have reminded me that one person's choices, small, careful, thoughtful choices, can shape an entire future." Kale felt the warmth of her words. "And you have taught me that leadership is not just about strength, but about care, empathy, and trust. That is what makes your people strong, Lyra. And together, we can guide this city, this alliance, and perhaps even the galaxy toward something better." They walked in silence for a while, enjoying the calm. The city below buzzed with life, yet the peace they had helped create seemed almost fragile in its perfection. Kale knew that vigilance would always be necessary, but he also understood that the foundations they had built, trust, ingenuity, and compassion, were far stronger than any weapon. As evening fell, the central plaza glowed under artificial lights that reflected in the colors of the central tree. Citizens lingered, celebrating quietly. Kale and Lyra stood together, watching the scene unfold. Humans and aliens shared stories, laughter, and food. Differences faded under the warmth of cooperation. The world they had fought for, dreamed of, and worked toward was here. Lyra turned to Kale, a smile in her eyes. "Do you remember the river by the old palace gardens?" she asked, echoing a memory from their childhood. Kale chuckled. "I do. I fell in at least 3 times trying to skip stones." Lyra laughed softly. "And yet you always got back up, didn't you?" Kale nodded. "Always, just like now. Even after war, even after challenges, we keep moving forward. That is what humans do." Lyra looked out at the city, at the children playing, and then back at him. "Then let us move forward together, not just for ourselves, but for everyone here, for the future we promised." Kale placed his hand over hers, a simple gesture that carried the weight of trust, history, and shared purpose. "We will, together." Night fell, and the first stars appeared over the city. The twin moons reflected in the waters of the fountains and the crystal towers, painting a scene of beauty and peace. Kale and Lyra stood side by side, knowing that challenges would come again, that the galaxy was vast and full of uncertainties. Yet in this moment, they understood the truth of humanity's power, not in weapons or war, but in ingenuity, compassion, courage, and the unwavering desire to protect life. They remained on the terrace long after the crowd had dispersed. Lyra leaned against Kale, her presence steadying him as much as his steadied her. Around them, the city slept, the lights shimmering gently, and the stars above shone like silent witnesses to a new era. Kale thought of Earth, of battles fought and survived, of people who had dreamed of peace in a galaxy torn by conflict. He thought of the friends he had lost, the choices he had made, and the people he had sworn to protect. And he realized that the greatest victory was not survival alone, but the creation of something lasting, a world where humans and aliens could thrive together, where intelligence and empathy guided decisions, and where trust and hope could outshine fear and violence. Lyra spoke quietly, almost a whisper. Kale, this is what I wanted when I was a child. A world where we could live freely, laugh freely, and care for one another. I see it now. Thanks to you, we can finally have it. Kale smiled, feeling the weight of her words. And thanks to you, Lyra, we are proving that even in the darkest times, humans can inspire hope. We are showing that the future is not only survivable, it can be beautiful. They stood together, watching the stars, watching the city alive and thriving below. The war was over. The challenges of rebuilding had been met. Trust had been restored. And humanity, through courage, ingenuity, and compassion, had not only survived, but shown the galaxy what it meant to endure, to protect, and to create a future worth living for. As the night deepened, Kale and Lyra knew that their journey was far from over. Yet for the first time, they felt certain that whatever came next, they would face it together. They had survived the war, they had averted new threats, and they had rekindled a friendship that had spanned years, distance, and conflict. And they had proven, above all else, that humanity's true strength lay in the mind, the heart, and the choices made for the greater good. Under alien stars, with a city alive below them and the promise of tomorrow shining brightly, Kale and Lyra stood together, ready to build a future that honored the past, embraced the present, and inspired hope across worlds.